Good morning. I've been singing. We logged in and hello, welcome everybody as they log in. And it was just Connie and Olivia on, and Olivia says, "Well, I'm not on yet." So it was Connie and Connie. They watch the social media feeds, and I was just going through just the two of us, and I don't know any of the words. It just occurred to me, just the two of us. I don't know what the words are. Just the two of. I know you and I. Anyway, so that's my amusement of myself this morning. Good morning. It is Nothing Else Matters. It is Sunday, November 7th. Wow, 11/7. So we're about 7 weeks before the end of the year. 2022 is around the corner. I am Sunday, 10 a.m., a new and improved 10 a.m. If it feels an hour later, it's because it is. So I'm in my basement. My son is on the ones and twos. People say, what are the ones and twos? It's he's on all the switching. My wife and daughter are on social media. Pop is in the studio. Kenobi is not in the studio. Kenobi is on the 18th floor at his dog sitter's, living his best life with, not a Yorkie. What is the dog? A Corgi. He's partying with his Corgi buddy today. What's her name? Yeah, something like that. Anyway, so Kenobi is out of here. So we're going to be gone for a couple of days, which means Kenobi is gone for a couple of days. But wherever you are, whenever you are, I pray peace on you. And some of you are gathered. This is your Sunday service. You've got a community of believers. Some of you are watching replay. Many of you pastors are on with us. Good morning. But it's going to be a powerful day. Before we get into things today, I just want to thank you so much for your kindness and support. Those of you who of course, watch us weekly, pray for us weekly. Those of you who support us, sometimes weekly, sometimes monthly, we're so grateful for it. It makes all the difference to us. We have, for the love of Christ, for the sake of Christ, stepped out and said, God, we will preach what it is we're seeing without holding back, without reservation, and without consideration of consequence and fallout and everything else. And those of you that have joined in with us, not only meeting us here each week, which that number is growing, it's growing and growing. The people who are part of this Nothing Else Matters journey, I'll say. But for those of you who are, if you're being blessed by it, thank you for your support. If you believe in what we're doing, thank you for your support. And especially for those who just know God has called me to be part of this. And so thank you. It means everything to us. Let's go before the Lord in prayer. Father, I thank you for the spirit of wisdom and revelation today and the knowledge of you and of your will. Speak to us today. Father, I yield myself in your very capable hands as I attempt to articulate, to give utterance to the magnitude of your greatness and power and your goodness and love through a human vessel, two human vessels. I thank you for the help of the Holy Spirit, that not only is there utterance that you'll provide today, but there's even the ability to hear beyond what I'm saying, the voice of God behind the message today. Satan, you have no liberty. No weapon formed against this time shall prosper. Only the Holy Spirit has liberty. And Father, I thank you for a transformation that as we see the living word more clearly will be transformed. And Father, we are thankful for the flow, thankful to be caught up in what you're doing, thankful to be awakened to what is taking place. We give you praise for it today. Healing and health and peace and light and lightness and lifting and comfort and joy, may it abide, may it overtake each one listening wherever they are. Some are on a high mountain in great victory, some are in a deep valley of great sorrow and struggle right now. But we declare you are constant. Your presence is constant, and I thank you for the comfort that is supernatural. The Father of mercy, the God of all comfort, would envelop each one as they listen today. Peace in homes and hearts, we declare it so in Jesus' name. And all that agree with that say amen. All right, let's get into it today. For a title, we're talking about Christ's impossible ideal. Christ's impossible ideal. This is part 11, our conclusion of our parenting series. Don't tune out because it's about parenting, because it's really not. I'm not pastoring, but if I were pastoring, these are the things I would part into you. These are the thoughts that I would part into you. But because I am parenting, this is how I try to rear my own children out of the Omega view. If you're a very first time with us here on Nothing Else Matters, we are on number 63, which is kind of amazing to think about. If you've never been part of it, somebody say, where should I start? Start here right now. Get through this because a lot is going to come forth and give you clarity. But you can also go back. Many people say, I'm starting at Nothing Else Matters 001. You can do that. But also if you get around 46, 47, 48, 49, a lot of questions, a lot of recap. Not as much detail on the journey, but a lot of recap. You can find it there. But today, as we start out every week, and Nothing Else Matters, we deal with the Omega view. We deal with big, scary thoughts, and we're going to get into those scary thoughts today. You can tell by the title on the stream today that everything you know about church has changed, and that's kind of where we're going to start today. It has happened to me about maybe 2013. I was a senior pastor of a church in Jacksonville, Florida. I had finished the message. It was right around our anniversary. So 2013 would have been our 11th anniversary, I guess it would have been. And I finished the message, and right as I turned to step off the podium, away from the podium, off the platform, I heard this thought. It just, maybe it's from God, maybe not. It just kind of bubbled up inside me, this thought that I had just preached my last message as a lead pastor inside the church, and it riveted me. I stepped off the platform, went into the back. There were some elders and ministers there. We were debriefing on the service, and it was a tender time of worship, and it was a tearful time of fear and nervousness and questions and what does it mean, and I really had no idea. And because I live on autopilot, sometimes your loyalty to to the old thing you understand can be it can be an asset or it can be an enemy. It can be something that holds you past and through the storms of life, but it can also keep you from progress. And because the only thing I know is you pastor till you die. It's like a wedding ring. A guy told me one time, the only thing we know about pastoring is you put it on and you do it till you die. And I could never think about transitioning out of the church, etc. But I had this idea, and I'm going to give it to you as best as I can explain it. And this is how all mystical experience happens, right? All spiritual experience filters through, we're seeing something divine, but we're articulating it through thoughts that we have, thoughts that, like it says over in the scripture, that when Jesus met Saul of Tarsus on the road to Damascus, he spake unto them in the Hebrew tongue, right? And I don't really know if God speaks in a Hebrew tongue or in Japanese or Chinese or English or Spanish or whatever, but certainly as we encounter the divine, we interpret it in the language we understand, and we give weight and assign weight in the language and vernacular that we understand, because all mystical encounter, right, all spiritual encounter passes through our frail human limitation. So I thought about the tsunami, right, that hit Thailand and Phuket and these things, and I was thinking about it, and I remember the videos, and this is in this time of kind of contemplation and reflection, the videos of everybody standing on the beach as the water receded, right? They were out on the beach and the water receded, and people in hotels came down and people in the resorts came down, and they were like, what is this? And you're looking at this cove that they'd been swimming in was now just barren. There was no water. And they're staring and they're calling people and they're videoing, and then on the horizon something is coming. And they can't really make it out. What is it? But by the time they realize it's this massive wave, right, that's coming, it's too late. And they start running and screaming. It's a horrible just image that riveted me. Many of you have seen this. And people from balconies who were filming were screaming, run, 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 run. And I heard, I don't know if it's true or not, but I had heard that there were actually animals, right? That while the humans were on the ground, there were animals that started to sense ahead of time to get to higher ground. And that animals were moving up the mountain. Animals were moving up the hill. I had heard, don't know if it's true, anecdotal, how stuff on the internet, Mikey died of Pop Rocks and Pepsi, and of course, this is probably also true. But I had heard that there were even animals that helped humans get to higher ground, that there were elephants that lifted humans up to higher places in trees, and of course, any of you remember those horrific images. And as I thought about this in this time of prayer, I realized that it was not about the tsunami. I was looking at the church, because I knew that there was something changing. I knew the day of church as we knew it was coming to an end, and I realized that there's two options: to stand and watch it happen, or to get to higher ground. And I came out of prayer realizing that that something is shifting, something is changing inside the church as we know it. The very concept of the church, the very concept of Christianity as we understand it in the earth, is shifting. And I knew that it was time to get to higher ground. I knew not to stand there and watch it. And so this tension now, what does this mean? And I realized I had to get away to gain more articulation. And for the past almost 6 years now, that's what I've been doing. So from the end of 2013, that's the end of 2021, that's 8 years, but 6 years of just, okay, God, what does this mean? And so this is what I'm bringing to you now, and this is what we want to talk about today. What does it mean? Because as I began to get this understanding of the Omega View, as I began to talk about and share with my family on what I was seeing, I kept saying to them, this changes everything. And I would wake Connie up in the morning, and 3 a.m, she would say, okay, I said, this changes everything. What I'm seeing now of Christ changes everything. And so many of you who have been on Nothing Else Matters since number 1, it changes everything down to the core. And I have to say to you now, this is the first time I've ever said this, you now need to change. You now need to change. You cannot stay stuck in the old. You cannot stay stuck in the old paradigm. And what's happening here on Sundays, every Sunday that we gather, what's been happening for 63 weeks in a row is we've been chipping away at what the new looks like. And it's not the new, but what the new understanding, the new insight, what it looks like from the higher ground. And you can never go back. I can never go back to seeing it the way it was. And that leaves a lot of unanswered questions. And I think about the Apostle Paul, and I was thinking about this the other day, of, the Apostle Paul grows up in this idea of one family, one nation, one tribe, one temple, one Torah, one God. He grows up in this idea, and when he encounters Christ, it changes everything. And you can see him saying to his family, everything has changed. You can see him saying to his fellow Pharisees, right, and the zealot kind of community of Pharisees who were willing to shed blood in order to protect the nation, right? He's saying, look, everything has changed. What do you mean everything has changed? I mean everything has changed. But there were also questions. So should we circumcise our kids anymore? And a lot of it he didn't have worked out. It's like, I don't know. I don't know. Well, what about going to synagogue? Well, what about the law and the prophets? Well, what about the feast? Should we keep this? Should we not? What about the New Year? What about the sacrifice? Well, I mean, should we contribute? Should we pay the temple tax anymore? I mean, if the temple is not really where God dwells, and there's no need for blood sacrifice anymore, and that's not where the presence of God, I mean, should we? I mean, and the answer is, I don't really know. All I know is everything has changed. And so for 63 weeks, this is my 63rd weekly gathering here, I've been making the case for it, but now I want to let you know emphatically, without question, church as you understand it, the expression of Christianity in the earth as you understand it, as I understand it, has changed. And it's not throw everything out. It's to understand that with each step forward, that it's closing a door of what's behind. Once Paul understands that there is no more sacrifice, that the earthly temple was just a shadow. Why rebuild the temple in Israel when God doesn't dwell in a box, when he doesn't dwell in a place made with hands? Why have high priests when Jesus is the high priest? Why have sacrifices when the sacrifice? I mean, so it changes everything. And now you have to people. So what are you trying to say? Should we not contribute? Should we not go get forgiven? Should we not do the blood of sprinkling? Should we not? I mean, what does this mean? And the answer is, Paul spent the rest of his life working out what it means and passed us the baton that says, as you stare into Christ, as you look into the living word, allowing it to shift your understanding, your interpretation, understanding, tradition of Scripture, your application of Scripture, all of those things changing. And church as you know it has changed. Christianity as you know it has changed. We are in a massive ignited moment that is bigger than anything in my lifetime, bigger than anything in the past 200, 300, 400, 500 years, that what I'm, maybe 1,000 years, maybe 2,000 years, that what I'm saying will be condemned as a recycled heresy, but it is not a recycled heresy. It is a return to a truth that was obscured by nationalized, tribalized, weaponized portrayals and understanding of God. And I'm okay with the accusation. I'm okay with the fallout and the flack. I'm okay with the chatter. But what is important for me to let you know is that if you're watching this, it's all changed. It's all changed. And it's not that God has changed it. It's that once you step into the new, once you partake of the new wine, right? I got to stick with the old. I got to stick with the old. I got to stick with the old. And the vessels can't contain the new. But once you step into it, the old now doesn't sit right. And that's what many of you are happening, that we're going to end up there today. The old is not sitting right. Why? Because you've changed. And you can imagine Paul sitting back in a synagogue and he's listening to this, and one day the temple, and we're going to rebuild the temple, and God's going to restore Israel and kick the Romans out, and God's going to defeat the gods of Baal. And Paul's sitting here going, there is no gods of Baal. There's only one God. God of the Romans and God of the Greeks is the God of the Jews. And how can he sit there and contain this when he's gone up and seen it from a higher perspective? And that is what is happening. And that is why our gatherings here, whether you're a live gatherer, a replay gatherer, a sneak and secret gatherer, a chatter and talk about it like Nicodemus, I don't want anybody to know, but you know that what's coming forth in here is changing the entire thing. And it's not change it to throw it all out. It's change it to step into it for the first time, maybe in a way that we have never done before. So that is the subject of today's Nothing Else Matters. Now, if you haven't shared this yet, take a moment, click on it, and let's get into it today. I want to look at Colossians, the third chapter, and I want to look at the 9th through the 14th verses, Colossians chapter 3, 9 through 14, but let's look at this very quickly. Lie not one to another, seeing you have put off the old man with his deeds. So he's talking about this shift, right? But it's very important that the idea of putting off the old man is a progressive idea. It's progression, that there was a way that I was, and I'm getting rid of that. But two things are happening. There's getting rid of the old, but it's not getting rid of the old to step into the new. It's getting rid of the old to step into what has always been. Why? Watch this. Put off the old man with his deeds, and put on the new man, which is renewed in knowledge after the image of him that created him. So it's not that coming into Christ, this is interesting, is an addition of thought, an addition of revelation, an addition of spiritual perspective. It is at once an expansion and an increase, and also a return. It's a let's put on the new, but the deal with putting on the new, we're putting off the old, that's progress. We're putting on the new, that's progress. But the issue with the new is we're not putting on something unfamiliar. We're putting on the new, which is actually in harmony with the original image that we've been created in. So it's put off the old man. So you're in this place and you're shedding these old ideas, shedding these old understandings. And this is written to people with a Jewish philosophy of God, people with a Gentile philosophy of God, a pagan philosophy of God, a one God idea. It's written to all sorts of people. But you're putting off that and you're putting on the new, which is like, okay, putting off is progress, putting on is progress. But what you're putting on is not really new. It's a renewal to the true essence of how you've been created. It's a renewal to the true self. It's actually a connection. What we think is I'm moving towards the omega, moving closer to the conclusion, is at once moving back to the alpha. So I'm putting off the old. That's me stepping closer to the omega view. I'm putting on the new. I'm stepping closer to the omega view. But guess what? As I put off the old and put on the new, it's actually a renewal to what has always been. What? That human beings in their highest form are carriers and reflectors of the nature and image of God. So he says, and I like this, he says, put on the new man, which is renewed after the image of him that created him. Verse 11 is so key. Look at the word where. Where there is neither Greek, not wherefore, but as you put on the new, which is actually the old, as you put on what looks like progress, which is actually the original, in that light, in that context, in that view, when you start putting on the original knowledge of God, putting on the original essence of creation, as you're stepping forward, you're going back to who you truly are, back to Genesis 1:26, all male and female made in his image and likeness, red, yellow, brown, black, white, LGBTQ, straight, all Jew, Gentile, atheist, Hindu, Buddhist, Sikh, Taoist, theist, deist, anti-theist, atheist, doesn't matter. That when you say I'm putting off the old, that's progress. I'm putting on the new, that's progress. But as you move forward, you're actually moving back to the original thing. And in that place, back to the original thought, back to the original understanding, there is neither Jew nor Greek. The idea of tribalism, right? Circumcision or uncircumcision, religious division, barbarian, Scythian, bond nor free, but Christ is all in all. The Amplified Bible of verse 11 says this: in the new creation, all distinctions vanish. It's not that this is a one-day thing, or not that this is a only for those in Christ thing, but as you put on the new, in that new, where in the new creation, in what Jesus was raised from the dead, a new creation is launched in the middle of the existing creation, and those in whom the truth of Christ lives. The truth of Christ is a seed inside those that believe it. Those who believe it are a seed of new creation in the current creation that has been working throughout creation from the alpha to the omega to the conclusion. Now people who are awakened to Christ, they're awakened to the idea that, wait a minute, there's no natural distinction that goes away. There's no room for, and there can't be, now that we've stepped into Christ, ideas of Greek and Jew, ideas of circumcised and uncircumcised. There can't be room for ideas of difference between nations, of aliens, barbarians, or Scythians. There can't be room for the idea, well, this is a slave class and this is the free class. But when you step into this new man, which is not really new, it's the essence of all implanted knowledge of God that is inside every human being. He says Christ is in all. This is what you see now. Christ is all in all, and he's in everything, he's in everywhere, he's in all men, and he's without distinction of person. Stepping into the new is as you put off the weaponized, right? Paul had a weaponized idea, a nationalized idea, tribalized idea, an us-them idea, a small idea, an external idea. And as he steps in from the external to deeper into the internal, from the divisive to the uniting, from the exclusive to the inclusive, from the narrow to the large. As he steps into that, he's stepping at once making progress, but also stepping into what has always been. He's stepping into the true essence of humanity. Christ showed us the Father. Christ showed us what it means to be human. And stepping into him now, he's like, I realize that all this human distinction is not there. This religion, this tribe, this nation, that tribe. He says you step away from that. Why? Because that is the reality of the new creation, the world that's coming. It's not going to be divided in all those things, class and gender and all this stuff. That's the way that the world is coming, but that's also the way the world was, all human beings made in the image of likeness. That's the new creation, the new world that we're awaiting for, but it's also the reality of the new creation that exists inside the hearts of all who have come into the light of Christ, and those who have that light inside them are a new creation existing in the world. So verse 12 is so important. He says, so put on therefore as the elect of God. So what am I putting on? I'm not putting on a new weaponized religion. I'm putting on bowels of mercies, kindness, humbleness of mind, meekness, long-suffering. I now that I've come into the light of Christ, I'm forbearing towards all people. I forgive all people. I show the grace of God to all people, right? I'm seeing the world as God sees it, not as good and bad people, us and them. I'm seeing it as the Father, If any man have a quarrel against any, the same way Christ freely released you because of your blindness and ignorance, the same way God blesses everybody and shows his kindness and compassion no matter what tribe, religion, how good they are, better. He says you're walking into that knowledge, and above all, verse 14, above everything else, now that you're stepping into the new, put on charity, put on love, because love is the enduring. We have faith of Christ in Christ's victory over the dark powers. We have hope for a new world yet to come, the not yet world emerging in the right now world. But the thing we have above all that is love, because as we step into Christ, where we are putting off and putting on, where we are realizing we're only stepping into the true image of God that has already been, in that place, we're dropping the divisions, and in that place, the highest thing we can put on is love. Let's look here on the iPad. Let me get my stuff here. So let's talk about big, scary thoughts. The Omega view on your screens now changes everything, but it's not new. Stepping into the Omega. What do I mean by Omega? So there's the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the starting place of all the universe creation, the cosmos, the conclusion of all the universe and the creation and cosmos. They start in the same place. The Alpha is the Omega. Part of the problem with non-Christ-centered spiritual revelation and religion is we think that the Alpha is quite different than the Omega. We believe that God originally created good, but we believe it ends in warfare and bloodshed and murder, and that the longer time goes on, the revelation of God doesn't get more consistent with Christ, it gets more anti-Christ. But of course we know that's not true, that the Alpha and the Omega, they reflect. So the Omega view changes everything. It's going to reshape your idea of church. It's going to reshape your idea of souls. It's going to reshape your idea of the afterlife. It's going to reshape your idea of who's in and who's out, all these skewed things of individual salvation and who's on the right team and being on the right team before you die. And all of this changes once you step into the eyes of the Father. But it's not new just because it changed everything. It's like, oh, this is brand new. What we're dealing with on NEM is brand new. No, it's actually a return to the original on your screens. A guy wrote me this week. He said, Pastor, I feel like we've come to an end of an age. And, we have. It is the end of an age. Everything you know about church has changed. Everything you know about church has changed. If you don't get everything you know about, I'm a Christian, everything you know about those very words has changed. So we're at the end of the age? In one sense, yes, but really we're just a continuation of what has always been. We are stepping into the progression that has always been. Let me see if I can put this, let me see if I can find this here for you. So we have this idea, well, there it is. So we have this idea that, on your screen, so we have this idea that, that we're in something new. But in the truth of the matter is, we're heading towards, right, Christ. We're heading towards the fullness of that. Our dreadlock roster, right? We're heading to dreadlock Jesus, and we're starting here. Believe it or not, we started here. Right? Maybe his dreads weren't as long. I don't know. But I think God exists outside of time, right? Sans creation, there is no time. Okay, you understand this idea. And it's easy to think that, when the idea of Abraham coming to the one God idea, that he'd stepped into something new, but not really. Or that when Moses came into this idea of love being the sum total of all worship, right? When Christ, and then you have the apostolic age, it's easy to think we've come into something new. It's new to us, but it's not new. What? It's what's been working throughout time. It's the emergence of God, the birth of the new man, that the Alpha has always been headed towards the Omega, that the universe that began with love has always been headed to a conclusion point of love. So even though you and I are right here, and who knows where we are, I mean, we may have 1,000,000 years left, 100,000,000 years left, who knows where the end is, but what we're stepping into is, oh my gosh, I've come into this. I mean, when you come into Abraham, it's changed everything. When you come into Moses, it's changed everything. When you come into the prophets, it's changed everything. When you come into the apostles, it's changed everything. And somebody says, oh my gosh, here we are right now. It's changed everything. It has changed everything, but it's not new. We've not come into something that's new. We've come into the next level of progression of understanding the very essence of who God is, who we are, and the very nature of the cosmos. And we've done that in the person of Christ. So it's the end of an age on one sense, but at the same time, it's not the end of anything. It's just the next peeling of the onion to see Christ more clearly. So the Omega view is not, catch this, a sprouting up of revolution, reformation. I keep thinking, I was closing up the house the other day, and I thought, Father, I'm so grateful to be part of this little revolution, reformation that's taking place in my basement. And that's not what it is. It's not a revolution or reformation. What is it? It is a progression within the already unfolding trajectory of truth. We are just at the next understanding. When Christ came, the incarnation, the very blip of time, revealing who the Father is and the essence of humanity, the apostolic thing said, oh my gosh, everything has changed. Well, everything had changed, but it wasn't a reformation. It wasn't a revolution. It was just, oh wow, we see it clearly now. Moses saw it and the prophet saw it clearly. Moses said, I'm going to build you a tabernacle in the wilderness. That's what he thought God was saying. David came along and said, God shouldn't dwell in any shabby tent. He needs a Taj Mahal. He needs something fancy. So they built him something fancy. Isaiah comes along and says, man, God doesn't need anything fancy. He dwells in heaven and his footstool is earth. Stephen comes along and is like, God doesn't dwell in any temple. He dwells inside human beings. Paul was like, that all creation dwells in God and creation, and God dwells in all creation. It's a bigger idea. So it's the end of a thing. It's the beginning of a thing, but it's nothing new. All it is a continuation, progression within the trajectory of truth. And that's what we've been on. As I tell you these things from the Omega view, and we talk about hell, the concept of hell is an unjust idea. The concept of conditional transaction is an unjust idea. What are we doing? We're saying the same way we go, circumcision doesn't make sense. Paul was like, wait a minute, now that I've seen Christ, circumcision doesn't make sense. Well, what about circumcision in the Bible? He says, well, maybe circumcision that they had, it's really about, we think that's marking for covenant and everything else, but I've discovered people that aren't Jewish that have more of God than even some of my Jewish brothers, and I've discovered people that aren't circumcised that show more than that, and I'm starting to think that circumcision is a heart matter. Somebody say, what are you doing, Paul? I'm rethinking everything I know in light of the next truth that I've seen. But it's not that there was anything new. It's not like God's like, I'm really bored with animal sacrifices. Let me do something else here. Not true at all. It was their understanding was circumcision. Their understanding was animal sacrifices. But Paul, as he got into Christ, he would reach back in the scriptures and say, you know what? I know you hold this up as a feast, but maybe it really wasn't a feast. Maybe it was always about God's love and forgiveness of sins on his own accord. I know you guys have the idea of a good God on our side and the bad gods on their side, but now I'm thinking maybe all people are under the same God. He's rethinking. It's not that this is now suddenly a new truth. It's a new understanding of the truth that they had already known. Listen to this. Catch this idea. The apostles, right here at the bottom of your page, the apostles did not view themselves as starting a new religion or revolting against an old one. I can't stress that enough. The apostles, I mean, his whole heart, right? Imagine in up at the top of the page here, Acts 17, every time he would go into a Jewish synagogue. Why? He didn't think, I'm leaving Judaism, starting something new. He finally thought, I finally understand what it's about, right? He finally understood what Judaism was about. His whole thing was with the Jewish brethren here. I left out a little punctuation mark there. His whole thing with his Jewish brethren, Romans 9, 10, 11, is, I wish they would come into the knowledge of what I've come into. He never thought, I'm leaving Judaism and starting Christianity. I'm done with Judaism. There's so many flaws in that. They don't know what they're talking about. They don't understand anything. Come on, boys, let's go. Peter never thought, oh, we're so done with this. Peter thought he finally understood Judaism. James thought we finally get what this is about. It's not about this, it's about that. They stepped into the thing. They weren't throwing out the old. They were like, do you see all the misunderstanding we have of the old? Here's what it really means. And that's what's happening here at the Omega View. That's what's happening on NEM. I'm not throwing out, saying, get rid of all those ideas. Those ideas are bad. I'm just saying, wow, I've been a Christian my whole life, not my whole life, but for 30-something years, and I finally go, oh, I finally get it. It's not, cool, let's get rid of Christianity and let's start something else, any more than Paul thought, let's get rid of Judaism and start something else. He wasn't starting anything else at all. He was finally, in his mind, coming into the understanding of the truth. And every time there's that leap forward, remember, it's not a leap forward, it's actually a leap backward to the true essence of it. So Paul, through the veiled revelation of the one God, through his understanding of Judaism and the nature of God and all that kind of stuff, it's peeling away. He sees Christ, he sees the truth through it, he steps into it. But what he was stepping into was not new, it was old. But he wasn't saying, oh, get rid of all that old, let me start. He was saying, I finally understand what the old means. And that's what's been happening here week in and week out. It's like, oh, maybe this is what it means. Why? Because Christ is the constant. The person of Christ is the constant, and it's shedding the old ideas as we step into the new. All right, we got to move forward here. So that was big thought number 7. You can capture it if you want to. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, screen captured. Big thought number 8, right up here. I want to talk about this myth of spiritual deconstruction. It was like, well, I got to deconstruct spiritually. I had to get out of church. It was messing me up. I grew up in church my whole life. It messed me up. I got to get out of church. And one of the problems with spiritual deconstruction is this, the element of bitterness. And somebody say, what's wrong with bitterness? Bitterness is just a chaotic response to chaos. You know, bitterness is a chaotic response to someone else's chaos. And people say, I got to get rid of church. They're all evil. Church people aren't evil. Well, the church, they're all anti-this. They're all anti-this. I grew up in church. It did me so. But the people aren't evil. They didn't invent church. Right? They didn't invent church any more than Saul of Tarsus invented his idea that he was going to murder Christians to protect Israel. That's an idea he was born into. He was born into the story of Phinehas, right? He was born into the story of that we've got to keep the idol worshipers from corrupting us, and so let's go kill the person, and if we kill the person, God will protect the nation. Saul didn't invent that idea. He was born into it. Is it an antichrist idea? It is. Is it against the Spirit of Christ? It is. But Saul wasn't being a bad religious person. Saul was doing what he thought the will of God was. And this is what's interesting, because we have this idea Saul of Tarsus is out killing people. He's killing Stephen. He's killing Christians and everything else. Not because he's a murderer. Paul's not a murderer in that sense, that he's just like wanting to kill people. He was a soldier for God. And he was doing everything he did out of sincere belief. Then he encounters Christ. But then the scriptures, I don't know if this is necessarily true, but it's okay. Even if Paul wrote this, the scriptures don't have to be 100% God-aligned. This is a human being writing about mystical experience, trying to translate it through his veiled vessel into our veiled vessels. Paul would say this, well, everybody who's trying to get my Christian churches circumcised, I pray God cuts them off, cuts them up like idols cut themselves up. And it's like, wait a minute, Paul, everybody trying to bring circumcision into your Christian churches, these Jewish people trying to bring circumcision, they're not doing it because they're bad. They're doing it because they believe circumcision is what God expects. So when people come out and they say, I'm bitter because of what happened at the church. I'm bitter because I was raised in church. I was raised in church and I couldn't go to movies. I was raised in church and I couldn't date. I was raised in church and told, my gay uncle was going to hell because that's how they did. But the people at your church didn't invent this. They inherited it. And out of their sincere belief and understanding of what God wanted, they were living. Your mother's not, she never let us have TV, and she threw out my Harry Potter books, and she would let me date, and I just hate all that religion, and she beat me because she thought I was going to hell, Well, that's awful, and it's wrong, and it's evil, and the action should be condemned. But your mother was doing what she did because this was passed to her as a way to protect her child. Well, I see different now. That's the thing. It's not that you're good or any gooder than anybody else. It's that you've come into the sight of Christ. So we have this weird thing when it comes to, here you go, Mike, on the iPad, if you would, when this idea of bitterness, people get bitter against the church, and bitterness may sometimes clumsily lead to spiritual insight. So what is it? What do I mean by a chaotic response to chaos? There was chaos, antichrist chaos going on in the religious worldview of the church it came out of. They were Christ amiss. Okay, you understand that? But out of their Christ amiss chaos, they did all the awful things they did. But for you to come out of that bitter, you are now in a chaotic response to their chaos. I was talking to somebody the other day, and they were telling me their child was really dealing with some situations, and they said, well, a guy says, well, I left my wife when my daughter was young, and I bailed on her, and now that I bailed on her, she's acting out in her teenage years, and she's in her, mid-20s, and she's going crazy and everything else, and she's blaming it on the fact that I walked out on her, her mama or whatever else. Well, here's what's happening. She can seem like she's enlightened. Look at this, because of this is what you all did to mess up my childhood. This is my chaotic response to it. Well, keep in mind that whatever you did, sir, to mess up your marriage was a chaotic response to the chaos you were born into. And, well, my daddy wasn't there and this and that. And well, what about his daddy? What about his daddy? What about his daddy? So as the girl in her 20s is blaming her chaos on her parents' chaos, and as they blame it on their parents' chaos because so-and-so molested me and so-and-so wasn't there, and as they blame it on their chaos and they blame it on their chaos, you're going to get back to the idea of a garden, right? The idea of that there was chaos by the dark powers introduced, and we're all born into chaos. So what we got to make sure is there is chaos that we got to get away from, but to end up in a chaotic response and reaction to that chaos is to perpetuate it. So you raise your children. Church is bad. Christians are bad. They're all evil. They're a bunch of this. They're a bunch of that. Really, they are not any of that. They were Christ amiss. They didn't see the light and dignity of all people because what they had been inherited was a weaponized, violent idea of God. And true spiritual insight, you may come into the knowledge of the truth even though it started with bitterness, but I tell you what else is true. You will not get into spiritual insight and remain bitter. Why? Because true spiritual insight always engenders Christ-hearted compassion without any room for bitterness, which is what? That you don't come out and look at the church or look at your family or look at them. Look how evil they are. Look how evil they are. Look how evil they are. Once you really have spiritual insight, you go, wow, they're blinded to some things. The dark powers have skewed their view of God, and they're operating in an antichrist view of God, and man, I have compassion on them. Why? Because when you rise up to the top, to the omega view, you don't get up here and say, that's the bad them, this is the good us, look at the evil them, they're so terrible. You look up and say, wow, look at how the chaos has blinded so many people, and look at all the harm people are doing to people out of that blindness. So you stepping into sight, if it's true insight, can't produce bitterness. When you step into true spiritual insight, it produces compassion. Why? Because you realize that the things that they did, what did Jesus say on the cross? Forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. What did Stephen say? Lay not the sin to their charge. They have no idea what they're doing. And so you look back on your childhood, your church experience and everything and say, wow, these people thought they were serving God like Saul of Tarsus. While he was psycho, while he thought he thought, I'm going to kill people in the name of God. He encounters Christ and goes, man, I totally misunderstood. So the fact that you come into a new knowledge of spiritual insight, the way you'll know you're there is not when you get mad and bitter against everybody. Look at these awful people. they don't know God. No, that's a pseudo spiritual insight. That's a satanic perversion of spiritual insight. Why? Because if a response to chaos ends you up in chaos, if a response to Antichrist thought ends you up in Antichrist thought, you missed it. What you should come out of it with is, wow, well, this is. So people say, well, we ought to condemn Muslims because all they're doing is acting out on their book, and even if only 10% of all Muslims really believe that, that's 160 million violent. That's crap. That's all stupid pseudo-intellectual crap. The truth of the matter is every true person trying to truly connect to God, they can connect to God who is love even through their weaponized verses. We read violent scriptures in the Bible, and the vast majority of us would never, ever, ever do anything like that. Why? Because even though we go into these weaponized scriptures, we're trying to connect to God who is love. And the vast majority of Muslims go into it trying to connect to God who is love, Allah who is love, right? The merciful, right? We understand this to be true. But are there people that can be weaponized? Yes. But are those people evil? They're blind. They believe that what they're doing is out of sincere devotion to the values of their religious worldview. And what I look at them as is not, look how evil they are. I look as a man, they're caught up in the dark powers. The same way somebody who bashes LGBTQ, the same reason a parent is abusive or tries to hurt their children to keep them from going to hell. I don't look and say, oh, that's a bad woman, that's a bad father. I look at, wow, somebody has been deceived by the dark powers, and look at how their Christ blindness has caused generational chaos. So you're saying it's okay? I'm not saying it's okay. We can clearly condemn evil, but we have no reason to slot people in places of, you're a good person, you're an evil person. These are thoughts that are evil. These are behaviors that are evil. These are thoughts that are good, behaviors that are good. But the omega view, true spiritual insight, doesn't let you get bitter. You have to come out of it on the other side and say, man, church is changing. I heard Pastor Mike say the other day, church is changing. That's why I can't stand this music. I can't stand these sermons. Look, you've not encountered Christ. If all you look and see how awful, how stupid they are, still talking the same, but you've not encountered Christ. The truth is when you encounter Christ, you come, right it says on your screen, true spiritual insight engenders Christ-hearted compassion. You don't look at people and say how awful they are. You look at them and say, wow, I was also Christ amiss in my view, and I don't have room for bitterness. I'm just grateful for sight, but now I want to be a light that shines light instead of I'm going to tear the whole thing down. Look at me how awesome I am. I came out of church and church sucks and church is not Christ and Jesus isn't there and he left a long time ago ago, and I left a long time ago, and look at me, I'm so spiritual, and I'm just going to crap on all these people. You have not yet connected with God, because when you're crapping on people, the Father doesn't crap on people. The Father sees, this is my children, and my children have a wrong view of me, and I have compassion on their blindness, even when that blindness was, remember, Jesus came and tried to change people's idea of God, and rather than let their idea of God change, they chose to kill God instead. And when they chose to kill God instead, what did Jesus do? Well, that's fine. I'm going to burn every one of y'all. No, he said, Father, I realize the only thing that's happening here is their blindness. Because they don't see you, they don't see me. Because they don't see me, they're operating in a violent way towards me. What did the scripture say that Jesus said to Saul of Tarsus? Why do you persecute me? Paul, you have an idea of God, but your idea of God is wrong, which means you have a wrong idea of me, which means you're weaponized and hurting people. But once you encounter the truth of God, Saul didn't get bitter and say, yeah, I'm leaving all those Jews, I'm leaving. He went back into the synagogues to try to bring light to those places. And he didn't say, God, curse every one of them and kill them. Romans 9:10, he says, I pray that their eyes would be open like mine. They have tremendous excitement for God like I used to, but they don't really know God. That's the heart of someone who's encountered Christ, not this bitterness. They can all burn in hell. If that's where your heart is, your bitterness may clumsily lead you to spiritual insight, but once you get to spiritual insight, you can't have bitterness. You can just look back on mom, dad, the church, the mosque, everybody else and say, wow, look at what the dark powers do in the world and how they blind us. But coming into Christ's light, you don't get a condemning heart. You say, all of these are God's children, and it grieves you because of their blindness, but you don't get high-minded and bitter. You don't come out of the us, them, and into the us, them, and claim spiritual insight, because when you came into spiritual insight, there is no us, them. It's all people at different degrees of sight and different degrees of blindness. And guess what? And it's you and I at different degrees of sight and blindness as well. Let's move on here a little bit further. I hope you're catching this. We're not going to finish. Here it is. The Omega view evaluates doctrines and practices along the spectrum of either what? It's a Christ-aligned doctrine, Christ-aligned practice, or it's a Christ-amiss practice. I mean, that's a big thing. The doctrine of, conditional salvation you have to believe in order to escape hell is Christ-amiss. That's not true. It's unjust that anybody would have to believe in Jesus Christ in order to get out of hell is an unjust idea. But you go further than that. The idea that God would be so angry that he would beat his child so he didn't have to beat his other children is an antichrist idea. So you have to come back and go, okay, well then what is the truth of this? We know Jesus existed. That's a fact of history. There's no mystery about that. This is 100%. We know he died. This is factual, historic idea. You can Google stuff. No intelligent, qualified, credentialed expert would ever say there was no such person as Jesus of Nazareth. I mean, these are foolish ideas. So then what is it, right? What is the mystery? And not only who is Jesus as a man, but if that was an incarnation of something larger, the cosmic Christ, then what is the truth of Christ? You deal in the living word, right? And not weaponized by the written word. How you go through the Old Testament and say there's no way God's burning down homosexuals in Sodom and Gomorrah or inhospitable people. There's no way God's killing babies that are caught in adultery. Why? How do you know that? Because we know Christ, right? There's no way Christ, who is love, would ever engage in that. Well, that's what the book says, the red letters. You forget the red letters. You only accept the red letters or the black letters or Genesis to Revelation insofar as they are in harmony with the person of Christ. Because we were not turned over to a static book. We were turned over to a living spirit. And that living spirit, how do we know what to judge? Because it's true in the deepest parts of our inner selves, because we are made in the likeness and image of God. So we evaluate doctrines and practices as being Christ-aligned or Christ-amiss, but watch this. But we appraise people, not as being good or bad. We appraise people as either being Christ-seeing or Christ-blind, right? That's what it is. And remember this, it's not just Christ-seeing and Christ-blind. This group sees Christ in this group, but it's a macro. On the large picture, do you see Christ? But guess what? It's on the micro spectrum as well. What is that? That in some areas of my life, I can be tremendous Christ-sighted. But in the other areas of my life, I can be Christ-blind. I mean, I want you to think about it. If you're a fiscal conservative that believes in, tremendous, minimum taxes and freedom and free markets and blah, 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 but you also believe in a woman's right to choose abortion on demand, you don't have a political party to push, right? Who do you vote for? Because this one goes with one half of you and that one goes with the other. My point is we can be split and compartmentalized in a lot of different things. We could be totally Christ-sighted in one view of how we view the subject of race, but totally Christ-blind in the way we view gender. We can be totally aligned and say, you know what, I believe that there's no way God's going to send all Muslims, Jews, Hindus, and atheists to hell, because as I know people, I see them and I see Christ in them and I see their love, and a lot of them know more God than I do. And you see that totally, but then you say, now LGBTQ, that's a perversion. I mean, so you could be Christ aligned in one area and Christ blind in another area. So it's not just a macro of, are you one of the individuals that see, but every individual is on a spectrum of sight and blindness, not only on one spectrum of the big picture of seeing the true essence of religion and the true essence of the Omega view, but within that big picture, the small picture of how much in different areas, because I could be totally Christ-sighted in one area today in 2021, but 5 years from now, totally see, wow, I totally had it wrong in another area. So it's an ongoing thing of not what group are you in the good group or the bad group, but how awakened and awakening are you to the light of Christ in operation. You can catch it on your screens in 5, 4, 3, and we're moving on. Here we go. Big thought number 9. Woo, big scary thought number 9. Paradigm shifts are gradual and sudden. Pick a lane, man. They're gradual and sudden. Christ is working, springing slowly, constantly throughout time. And then we think, man, I just had an encounter with Christ and everything changed. Well, not really. The encounter with Christ changes everything, sure, but the encounter with Christ is not the original point. It's been springing from Christ for a long time. This is a big thought. Here we go. The tipping point before the turning point contributes to the sensation of suddenness, right? So here's my idea. I told you I got born again October 28th, 1988. That's 33 years ago. I served Christ for 32 years, but didn't become a Christian until October 2020. What am I saying? That was my tipping point, my turning point. And it can seem like, oh yeah, you were one way up until October 2020 and then you changed. Yeah, that's what it seems like. But guess what else is true? Introspection. On the new road, right now I'm on the new road, the Omega View road, whatever. As I think about it, I didn't recognize before, but I recognize that there's a gradualness that was happening to me way before October of last year. Beneath the seemingly sudden, right? Oh my gosh, last year, 2020, everything spilled over and I totally changed. Yeah, but as I look back on it, there was something building up, right? There was a spilling over of what had actually been bubbling up for quite some time. So as I started teaching on the Omega View, October of 2020, right? As I started teaching the Omega View, I started teaching in August, and I thought something's different here. And then in October, I was like, oh my gosh, I see it. That's when the bucket tipped over. But as I looked back over my life, I realized I've been seeing this the whole time. You know, I'm going to talk about this next week. We have to re-identify the idea of missions, right? Missions work. We're going to go do mission. We're going to go build houses. We're going to go build wells. We're going to go do hospitals. We have to completely reevaluate that, because if you operate in any sort of mission or missionary work under the auspices, under the assumption that there's an individual team to be on through faith in Christ, all of the missions has an asterisk on it, right? It's like Barry Bonds or whatever his name is, Mark McGwire's home run record. Well, yeah, he did get the home runs, but the fine print says, he had a little special sauce, right, on that Big Mac. Big Mac had a little special sauce, right? So it's there. So did we do mission? Did we build schools? Yeah, we did. But every action that is done out of the wrong idea of a transactional, conditional, eternal salvation, our mission and our love is not, you can't even really do anything for anybody legitimately until you operate from the Omega View. But we get brought into Christ at 5 times 5. I don't want to go to hell. I don't want to go to hell, so I'll get saved. But then if 5 times 5 we think is 30, then we're wrong, because we came into Christ from a wrong view. And even all the right things we do after are done from a wrong place. So we got to get back to that thing. But remember, get back to it. Say, I just totally changed in October 2020. But as I look back on my life, I had been pressing for this all the time, because my heart knew. Remember, I'm renewed in knowledge. Me stepping into this new understanding of the Omega View is actually stepping back into the core essence of how I was created. It's progress and a return to the original. So what seems like it spilled over. Oh man, Pastor Mike, man, it just all came out, and the last 12 months have totally changed them. Well, that's the spilling over. But it was really the last 30 years, because I was always pushing for LGBTQ dignity. I was always pushing for the dignity of all people, not just Jews and the 4 or 5 nations that help Israel. I've always been pushing for humanity above religion, race, tribe, gender. I've always been pushing for that. So somebody said, oh my gosh, he's totally preaching crazy. Connie, help me with this. I said, Connie, everybody's going to think I betrayed him. She said, no, if they were listening to you the whole time, they knew your heart was already here, and you're just formalizing doctrinally what you've always been living out. So catch the idea again. At first, you look at it and you go, wow, we hit a tipping point. I remember I used to take the kids to this place As a matter of fact, it's in Orlando. We're on our way to Orlando. We have not, as many of you have not had a break with family in quite a while. We've done trips to go here and to go see these people, but I'm taking my children away. My daughter, 17, last year is a trip. We missed family vacations. We try to take one around their birthdays, so we're taking one. We're going to go see the mouse, right? We're going to pay homage to the mouse, so that's going to be really great. But they have this bucket on the little, we're going to see several mice, I guess, and see the rat. Well, you're not allowed to say the rat. I don't want to lose my free passes at Disney, so you're not allowed to say that. Oh, yes, I'm going to go see the mouse and the rat, Remy, right? I'm going to go see Remy, rat-tat-tat-tat-tatooey, ratatouille. So anyway, so at the place in Reunion where we used to go, they had a water park, and this water park had a giant bucket. I mean, a giant bucket bigger than my hands can reach, and they would fill with a spout, and it would fill, and then everybody would wait under it, and it would dump over. So what's the tipping point? For me, the tipping point is I'm going to preach the Omega View. It's going to cost me everything. Nobody's going to have me back in their churches. And I'm telling you this, when I started preaching this, people who had supported Connie and I for years, I mean, cut us off, never just bloop, we heard what you said on the internet, you're gone. Gone. And so it was like churches, everything, conferences, whoosh, it all just went away. That's right. God has us. I'm not worried about it. It was instantaneous. But people say, man, did you hear what he did? But what you're hearing last year was the bucket tipping over. But it didn't start with the bucket tipping over. It had been filling and filling and filling for a long time. So again, the tipping point and the turning point, those two things make it feel like, man, there was a sudden change. But in reality, as you look back, there's been a bubbling up, and that bubbling up eventually leads to a spilling over. I hope you're catching it. Let's get this last thought. This is the thing, the dichotomy, right? It's right here. Here's the goocher. The goocher is this. There's a dichotomy. What is that? It's this idea of always knew and just realized. Remember we told you? I'm preaching what you've always known. I've never heard it. You know what I'm thinking? I've been thinking recently, but you're really not thinking it recently. You've always known it. Why? Because two things are at work. First of all, the Imago Dei. How can you have always known something? Because what we're preaching in the Omega View is the true essence of the very image of God in which you've been made. But then how do we preach the Omega View? How do we preach that we're heading towards something? Because we're stepping into something that we're just realizing. But how do we preach the Imago Dei? Because it's something we've always knew. So each step forward into what you're realizing is actually a return to the essence of what you already knew. So we're putting off the old, putting on the new, which is the Omega View, coming into the higher view of the world, where Paul says, now that I'm coming into the higher view, I see no Jew nor Greek, nor bond nor free, nor class, nor male nor female, nor our God's their God. He said, I'm not seeing it from that way anymore. Somebody say, woo, Paul, you're really reaching higher. But while he was reaching higher into the Omega View to see it from God's perspective, he was actually reaching to the very core of the knowledge of the image of who he had been created. So there's this dichotomy. There's what? There's the idea of, oh my gosh, I'm just realized ABC. But you know what? I always knew that. Because even while we were preaching the wrong thing, we always knew that. We can preach, yeah, I'm going to hell, they're all going to hell, the gay's going to hell, the Muslim's going to hell, da-da-da. It only takes 5 minutes with the Muslim coworker, and all of a sudden you're like, well, Mahershala Ali, I guess, he's pretty cool. Okay, everybody's going to hell except him. All atheists going to hell, da-da-da. But Ricky Gervais, man, that guy's full of love. I can't say the language here. But he's a blank and a blank and a blank, and he knows that, and we know that, but he's fun and he's love, and you can see it. He has a heart for people, and he has a heart for animals, and he has a heart of God. He has the heart of Christ. Somebody, he doesn't even believe in Christ. He denies Christ. He said Christ doesn't matter. He cannot escape being made in the likeness and image of Christ. He can do all that all day long, but we know he was made in the very likeness and image of God, who is love. Well, yeah, you're right. All atheists are going to hell, but I like Ricky Gervais. He's pretty nice. Okay, well, maybe not all atheists. What are we doing? We humanize, and the second we humanize and see people, or we know everybody's going to hell, but then when our daughter converts or becomes Jewish or whatever, we say, well, yeah, but God, because we can see their humanity, we know the Father's heart, we know the Mother's heart, we know the heart of God because we are that, because we had that compassion, because our hearts break, because that's a made in image of likeness. When we step into that, it looks like we've changed. It looks like, oh my gosh, they've changed, but you've really not changed anything new. While you're putting on the new, you're actually stepping into the very essence of the old. So the Imago Dei is the image and likeness we've been made in. It's the conscience and consciousness of God that all human beings have. And as you step into the higher view of the world through the person of Christ, it looks like you're stepping into all brand new. Oh man, they went way off track. But it's not really way off track. It's just a return to the very knowledge. It's getting more in contact with Christ and ourselves and God than ever before. Why? Because we're being renewed into the knowledge of the true essence of who he is and who we have been from the beginning. My God, I hope you're catching it. My head's about to explode. I hope you're getting it. Capture this on your screens. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Here we go. The Omega View. Number 7, thoughts on parenting. Let's knock this out. I'm not going to get to the question this week. The question from last week is the question from this week. It's the question from next week. But we are going to finish parenting here. This is part 11. Our parenting series goes to 11. The Omega View parenting is about, and we're going to get just a minute. What time is it? I've got 5 minutes. Give me 5 minutes. Anybody out there give me 5 minutes? If you give me 5 minutes, click like whatever. It's 5, that's 10. It's 15, 3 of you. That's all I needed. All right, 15 minutes. I'm kidding. 5 minutes. I got to go. The mouse and the rat, they're waiting on me. I can't wait to get out of here. We are at, Kenobi is at his doggy daycare. We tell him it's winter camp. Hey, you want to go to winter camp? He doesn't know. Brain the size of a walnut. He's a pain in my households. Okay, Omega View parenting is about displaying and portraying the patience and hope of Christ. If you want to raise your church right, see, this is why, Pastor, you have to change. You can't keep watching me every week. You have to change. You have to go out to your church at some point and go, you know what? The idea of heaven and hell based on conditional salvation is an unjust idea. We're never going to talk about it again. We're not going to give altar calls in our church the way we've been given altar calls because that is an old idea. You got to change at some point. So I don't have a congregation to tell this to, but I tell it to my kids that if you want to know what it means to parent from the heavenly view, it means don't be violent trying to keep your kids out of hell, trying to make sure they're on the right team. We don't need Christ. When we step out of time and into the Spirit, everybody's going to see the truth. There's no need to awaken to the truth after you're dead. The miracle of Christ is awakening to the reality right now. And that's how come people who don't even know Christ can walk in that reality. What are they doing? How can they be in the reality of the Omega View when they're not even into Christ? Because they don't have to put on to find it. They are already made in the likeness and image of everything that I'm trying to say. How do we portray the persons of Christ, right? Christ's patience and hope. How do we teach it? We show it first. We carry the patience and hope to and for our own children. Your kids are going to be all right. Chill, Winston. They're going to be all right. Stop prophesying death over them. Well, they're doing this and they're doing that and they're doing this. Then talk soberly to them about it. Talk soberly to them about the emptiness of the world. We've talked about it in the series, spiritual sobriety. Yeah, but they're out here and they're out here and they're out here. And you know what? It's tough. They got some tough sledding, but their soul's not at stake. They're just missing Christ. If they're trying to find their life in substance or sex or vanity or money, then they're Christ amiss because light of Christ would tell them that's not what life's about. But we keep trying to make sure I don't want them to go to hell. I'm afraid if they leave Christ, what if they stop? It's the wrong thought. That was never an issue to begin with. So you got to let that go. You got to demonstrate, I believe in you. I got you. I'm with you. My son had a project the other day, and he's like, Mal, I feel bad. I ran into this thing, and something happened, and this and that, and now you guys are having to help me. I said, what is your problem? You're my son. I would do anything for you. It's a joy to help you. It's a joy to serve you. You guys shut down every week to come help me do this thing. It's what we do. We're part of a community. We're a family. One of my children, who will remain nameless, lost a electronic thing that we had given him. And Connie's like, we gotta get this replacement for child A or child B. I won't tell you which one it is. And they lost this thing of value, felt bad about this thing of value. See, I'm using the pronouns they. Could be either one. They lost this thing of value, wanted to replace this thing of value, felt bad about this thing of value. And Connie and I have been watching the sales from moment one, and we went out and replaced this thing of value. And I thought, I'm going to hand it to him. I'm going to hand it to child A, child B, and I'm going to say, here you go, grace is real. And I realized that's not true. I'm not doing this because mercy is a real thing. You're a screw up and there's mercy. It's because you're wonderful, because you're the best son or daughter on the planet, because you're worthy of this. I spent the 100 and I spent the second 100 because you're worthy of it. Not because, well, you ought to be glad there's grace. No, that's not how I want to raise my children. That's not demonstrating the patience and hope of Christ. Christ doesn't look at me and say, well, I mean, you're a total screw up, but I guess I'll take care of you again. I'll let you see the day. That's ridiculous. We should demonstrate and portray and display the patience and hope of Christ. Here, I got you this. Oh, you didn't have to do that, but you're my son. You're my daughter. I love you. That's demonstrating the patience and hope of Christ. And I try to help navigate around. That's a pitfall. That's this. All the things we talked about in this series, I can't go back over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but all of them work together to now embody the patience and hope of Christ to and for our children. But also for your own children in your own house, you've got to embody the patience and hope of Christ for the people and systems of the world. That, yeah, there's some screwed up political systems. There's some screwed up political views. There's some screwed up people. People have stories. People come from chaos. We look at kids in school. We go, man, what's that dude's problem? What's that lady's problem? But we have to pause and go, where did the dominoes fall in their life, right? And we have patience and hope, and we believe they're going to be okay, and they can bounce back. And we have hope for them, and we demonstrate patience and grace for them. Why? Because we are all on the spectrum of seeing and blind. And to parent and to pastor, if I was parenting you, if I was pastoring you, I would say, look at the world, the Democrats, the Republicans, the Republican Nationalist Party, the Democratic Socialist Party, and realize they're all made in the image of God. They're all in the Imago Dei. They all have the knowledge of God, but we're all on a spectrum of micro and macro seeing and blindness. But we have patience and we have hope. Why? That not only our own children, our own family, our own husband, our own spouse, our own grandchildren, our own parents and grandparents, not only that, but the people and systems of the world, we have hope that even they are coming into. We believe that God is working. We believe leaven has been sown in the earth and that leaven is working. We believe a seed is, and it's working. So we have hope that there's emerging. And we see people, we say, hey, there's a lot going on there. And guess what? They're blind in an area that we might see in. But guess what? We're blind in an area that they might see in. So it works humility. Why? Because we're supposed to display and portray Christ's patience and hope. The third thing, we want to display Christ's patience and hope throughout the season of life. My mother told me, this brings tears to my eyes, in the last months when it became clear that she wasn't going to be here. She went away to a doctor and they thought she was doing okay. And then they said, well, things have turned. And she said, well, Mike, I'm going to take a break. Maybe I'll pick up my medicine next year. I'm just going to take a break, get my head right because the medicine was kind of messing her up. And the doctor said, sweetheart, you don't have a year? It was 6 weeks. You have 6 weeks. And she said to me, Mike, she said, well, I've tried my best. She said, Mike, I'm believing that God's going to heal me. But if he doesn't, I've tried my best to demonstrate to my children dignity in living. That when you're rich, you live with dignity. When you're poor, you live with dignity. When you got a lot, you live with dignity. And when you don't have a lot, you live with dignity. And she said, and I will demonstrate dignity to my children in dying, if that's what's happening. Well, this is in the seasons of life. This phrase here, I just love it, that every human being comes into this world astride the grave. All of us, we've got our left foot on one side of the grave, our right foot on the other side of the grave. This is how we come into the world. Life is a gift, and it's precious to be here. And when you realize from day one you've been astride the grave, you drop all this drama, drop all this negativity, drop all this internal stress, and live and breathe and enjoy. But if people don't get right with God, they're going to see we've been weaponized in stealing our very life because we're preoccupied with, are we on the right team? Who's on the right team? Who's the good? Who's the bad? But when you come from the Father's perspective and you know that one day all people will see, you have compassion on those who are seeing in different degrees, but then you rejoice that you've come to Christ because you're awakening to the big truth of who God is. So we go throughout the seasons of life showing Christ patience and hope. Why? We're astride the grave. Wow, all of us. I mean, we're just minutes away. I mean, in the time of life, we're just minutes, just seconds. I mean, just blink of an eye that the flower blooms. And you go, oh man, look at that. And then you go around the corner, they got all these, what are those things that we like, the tulips. All these tulips, you're like, man, they came up out of nowhere. And then you come around that same corner in a couple of weeks and they're gone. That is all of us astride the grave. And so we want to display in the seasons of life, the ups, the downs, the front, to our children, to our congregations, to the world, the hope and patience of Christ. Last slide. Oh, I got to let you capture it. Capture it in 3 and 2 and 1. Here we go. We're coming to a close. So what do? How do we do this to our children? How do we do this? We faithfully proclaim Christ's victory over the dark powers. Yeah, there's racism, there's all sorts of isms, but we believe that's been conquered. And our goal is to walk in the light of that we're no longer under the dark powers, seeing the world as us, them, violent, everything else. We see all people from how God sees them, and death has been defeated. And sickness, disease, and infirmity has been defeated. Doesn't look like it's been defeated, but that's the ultimate thing. That Christ didn't declare victory before the grave. Christ declared victory after the grave, right? So he took all the violence of mankind, all the suffering of mankind upon him. In his life, he touched it, partake of it, went to it, healed it, comforted it. And in his death, he absorbed it all on him and then conquered it in his resurrection, initiated a new creation. So we faithfully proclaim throughout all things. We don't look at a tragedy and go, oh my gosh, they all died and went to hell. We look at a tragedy because of, man, there are people hurting, there are people whose families are broken. There are people who are suffering, but we're touched with that suffering because Christ was. We're in that suffering because Christ was. We enter that suffering. We pray for that suffering. We seek to alleviate that suffering because Christ did, but we have hope even beyond this world. So we faithfully declare the dark powers have been conquered. And our goal as Christians is to not become part of the good God against all the bad people, but is to become part of those who realize that we no longer have to operate under that us, they, ism, blindness, all the anti-Christ ideas, but we can walk in truth. The second thing we do is we confidently declare our hope for the coming world. That no matter what you do in this life, it all comes to an end. Even if it's for meaning, it all comes to an end. Even if you had a noble idea and it had a flawed outcome, or you had a bad idea but it had a good outcome, it all comes to an end. But we declare the hope that one day that there's a coming new world. We live in the idea that there's a coming new world. And we choose to believe that we're inching towards it. Yeah, it's worse than ever been. I don't think the world is worse than ever been. There's less poverty in the world than ever been. There's less war than the world has ever been. There's less murder than has ever been. I mean, we're inching. Well, there's a lot of this and a lot of that. The dark powers want to make you think it's in a hopeless state, but we believe the leaven is working, and we believe that from the Omega view, from Nothing Else Matters, we're part of the next large unveiling, not a throwing out of the old, but the stepping into a better understanding of it than we've ever understood before, and we have hope for the coming new world. And finally, the last little graphic here. We live our lives, humbly endeavor to keep Christ's impossible ideal, that was our title, at the center of our plans and pursuits. I don't have time to get to you today. So this here is talking about Christ's victory. This 1 Corinthians 15 is talking about the coming new world. But all these scriptures here, Matthew, all the way through Matthew 5, 1 through 12, Matthew 5, 39 through 48, Matthew 6, 19 through 24, that's Christ's impossible idea. He says, you know what, get rid of your stuff. Don't have treasure on earth. Just take care of people. Just take care of the poor. Moth and rust will corrupt. Give it all away. Never pay attention to anything. Bless those that curse. I mean, all this kind of stuff. That's an impossible ideal. And it cannot be lived in this earth. But you know what? As we go through life, we live with that at the center of our plans and pursuits, which is what? We never get so self-absorbed in our prosperity, our well-being, our family, that we lose sight of the impossible ideal. It is not possible to make myself poor enough to eliminate poverty. But as I go and build and have my own life astride the grave to bear fruit and to prosper, as I walk that life out, I never lose sight of the fact that I have a mission to be touched by suffering. I have a mission to be kind and compassionate. Where is God? He's all around you in your neighborhood, suffering on the side of the road, suffering in your own city, suffering across the nation, suffering across the world. Christ is here, and we ought to live our lives. Yes, we have families. Yes, we have vacations. Yes, we go see the mouse and the rat. But everything we do, we never lose sight of the impossible ideal. What's the impossible ideal? Get rid of everything and just take care of everybody else. Give your whole life away. Lay it down. Have no possessions. Have no pursuits. Have nothing but Christ. That is an impossible ideal. No one can ever manifest that. Never judge. Never hold. Always turn the other cheek. Never expect for mine. Never ask for payment. Never want to be paid back. We don't live in that reality. But we keep that impossible idea at the center of our being. Why? That's the reality of the not yet world. And those of us who are awakened to Christ, we try to live by those not yet realities with as the center guide for us, even while we're doing very earthly things, sending our people to college and sending this. I got a new shirt. It's not a new shirt. It's because it's the only one I had clean in my thing. But I got a new shirt. Oh, you can't have a new shirt. Christ said you got to get rid of all your clothes. That's the impossible ideal. But while we're shopping, while we're buying, we never lose sight of the fact of others at the center of our human existence. Why? Because in the next world, there is no poverty. There is no lack. There is no tears. There is no us, them. There is no class. There is no have and have not. So you and I never live in this world fully consumed with this world and losing sight of Christ's impossible ideal. So we always keep Christ's impossible ideal at the center of our plans and pursuits. And that's all the time we have for today. Whew, I hope you got something. Listen, thank you so much for your support. You can reach us there, find out what we're doing. It's all right there. Thank you. If you believe in it, if you've been blessed by it, if you just believe in us, you're called to support us. Thank you. Some of you is just... You blow our minds. You say, look, this is what God said to do, and I'm doing it. I cannot thank you. I cannot thank you enough. You can reach us there, Give Safe and Secure online, and we got all the stuff. Why aren't you a church? Why aren't you doing this? Because we need the agility to say anything that we feel God is saying and not think, oh my gosh, what are we screwing up this time? It's there. You can do the apps as well. Somebody say, well, they're going to tax you on that. Of course they're going to tax us. We started an LLC. Well, this money doesn't go to us. It goes into the little app. It pays for all the streaming and all that. And if there's stuff left over, we say, okay, this is how we save up little by little to go see the mouse and the rat. So there it is. Or you can reach us. People write us every week. We get 1 or 2 letters a week. Thank you, Michael and Connie LLC. If you're making out a check or whatever, you can make it to that. And then you can send it there. But just the little notes, keep going. Hey, guy wrote me at 6:30 this morning. I am in tears. I finally watched this thing on Heaven and Hell. I finally watched what happens after you die. I am weeping. How did I live 30 years like this? Don't get bitter against it. Say, I've stepped into the new, and it has changed everything. So thank you for your support. Father, peace, protection, preservation, and health. Until we come together again, Lord willing, Father, we'll be back here next week to contribute to this unveiling, a new series, hopefully getting to a question. But all this week, favor around them like a shield, the ministry of angels. Thank you that our lives are redeemed from destruction. The joy of the Lord is our strength. And thank you for the reality of the living word unfolding and coming out of the shadows of all that would obscure the true essence of the Omega view of what's ahead, but also the true essence of who we are in the Imago Dei, already in the knowledge of who you are because we've been made in that knowledge. We're recovering that as Christ is unveiled. Peace upon each one. I declare it so in Jesus' name. Thank you for your love. Connie loves you. Olivia loves you. Mikey loves you. Pop-Pop loves you. Kenobi's waving to you from his high rise. He's fancy. He comes back. He's too fancy to even talk to us. He can't even talk to us little poor people down here on the ground. We love you. God loves you. And remember, nothing else matters but God. I'll see you right here. Would it be number 64? NEM 64, Lord willing, right here in the studio next week. God bless you.